here. And when I first set foot on the Rocky Mountains, I was like, why are these things here? Like, I thought they would be like monoliths, like Devil's Tower or El Capitan. But instead, most of them were just piles of shattered rock. And I'm like, why are they here? Like, why didn't that rock tumble away? So those are just a few examples of the commonalities. There's a lot more, but on to a different story. My point is that, and I shared this with our first class just 2 hours ago, there's a day in our life where for the first time we find out that there's such a thing as studying sustainability, or such a thing as environmental science, or such a thing as geology or paleontology. Prior to then, we were not aware. After that day, we are aware. And then with the first seminar, I spent a lot of time showing them the rock studies curriculum and the degree audit and their program sheets to build a familiarity that you have to take these sequences of courses and eventually you get to choose amongst packages of electives and things like that. And then we are constantly encouraging our students to pursue deeper engagement, like the field trip to the Gulf of Mexico that I'm going to speak on in a couple minutes, like the Pittsburgh Geological Society, whose meeting is tonight. And then what we really want is to you to become passionate, to be a passionate scholar, and to realize that that sophomoric notion that you had, that you are studying for the exam to get the grade, that's really not the model that we want. So as I read deeply into Darwin's life, I could see that by 20 years of age, 21, 22, and he would write about, he was the first person to draw a tree of life and to realize that organisms had common ancestors, that branches come out of the trunk. He knew so much about the architecture of life that it was clear to me he wasn't studying for an exam. He was studying the tree of life because he was captivated by the diversity of organisms that he could see. He was very passionate. He was doing it because he wanted to know. And I think that's a huge revelation, and it's beautiful. Teaching is a noble profession. And when we see a person come in and progressively climb this ladder and engage in deeper motivation, it's really, really gratifying to watch. So, you know, as we go into the holidays, let me just recommend you read The Voyage of the Beagle. It is by far the most widely read travelogue that's ever been written on planet Earth. And the crazy thing is that Darwin was 22 years old when he got on the boat. And by the way, his old man, his dad, was so pissed at him for dropping out of college yet again that his uncle had to intervene to get his father to say, okay, Chuck can get on the boat. And actually his father had to pay because it was a Royal Navy boat and Charles wasn't in the Navy. So his father actually had to pay for his passage. And it took his uncle to intervene because Chuck was afraid to talk to his dad about it, like he's going to blow up at me again. But what an expedition it was. So, you know, these are my conjectures upon what Darwin would say if we were sitting at that table together. First of all, he loved the term geologizing. I don't know whether he came up with it or Adam Sedgwick, who took him up into the north of Wales on a field trip and started to show him that rocks can be planar features that are tilted and things like that. There's just no question in my mind that Darwin would recommend that you follow your heart, because he did that. His daddy wanted him to be a medical doctor, and then his daddy wanted him to be a clergyman, and he spat both of those hooks and eventually had to say to his dad, "Dad, I'm going to be a naturalist." And that angered his father. So he would, I firmly believe, tell each one of you, you should follow your heart. And he didn't care. You know, he later on went on to say, I, a geologist. Darwin was a geologist. And if you don't believe me, you got to read about it because he said so himself. But it doesn't mean that he wasn't interested in biology or astronomy. All those things, he just loved it all. So when we take you guys on a departmental field trip, we're not we don't have blinders on that we're only interested in this sub-discipline. Like, we're trying to capture the whole story, the interdisciplinary collage. He would tell you definitely don't be bounded by what you perceive as the constraints of your discipline. And he would, you know, he had mentors who were telling Darwin, you've got to publish. Charles, you've got to publish. Charles, you've got to publish. And if any of you go on to graduate school or even collaborate in research with us in our department, you're going to hear your faculty say, Patrick, you've got to publish. So you got to learn the rules of the games you play. But there are some cool rules, but they're not written down. But man, do they lead to good things. Like, plan your next expedition now. The crazy thing is, I'm always trying to teach students about OPM, other people's money. So when you start getting creative and becoming a scholar and coming up with good stories and publish them with Slippery Rock University's name on it, they will buy you plane tickets and send you to faraway places to tell the world that Slippery Rock has accomplished scholars, and some of them are undergraduates. So a year ago, a handful of students got a plane ticket to go to Phoenix to report on work that we had done over the summer. And while they were there, I said, rent a car and go see the Grand Canyon. Monday, you don't have anything scheduled. Your Sunday's booked and your Tuesday's booked. Monday, you guys should go see the Grand Canyon. And so that was twinned onto plane tickets that Slippery Rock bought these students. I'm telling you, you got to learn how to play the game you are in. And lastly, and this comes right back to the story of the BP oil spill as well, but Darwin understood extinction. He did recognize that there were smilodons, for example, that were no longer on planet Earth, but he found the bones, so he knew they were there. But I just wonder, like, he loved life. What would he think about where we are at in 2020? As really wise women like Elizabeth Colbert wrote, The Sixth Extinction. And we're watching the bleaching of coral reefs and the acidification of the ocean and the deforestation in the Amazon basin, and now maybe the Tongass National Forest in Alaska. What would he say about all this? I mean, I'm going to leave that for you to speculate, but I can't help but feel that because of his passionate love of life, he would be appalled by some of what he would see on planet Earth today. And then as he was getting ready to come back to the UK, almost 5 years later, he was 3 years late. He thought he was going to be gone for 2, and he came almost 5 years late. That's another theme with my childhood. He wrote to his mentor, I'm going to ask you, Sir Henslow, to nominate me for membership in the Geological Society of London. And by extension, you know, I'm always telling my students, join the Geological Society of America. And the good Dr. Schiappa with us today is the president of the Pittsburgh Geological Society. And I'm always telling you, if you're environmental scientists, do not get turned off by that word geological, because there's no Pittsburgh Environmental Science Society. And believe me, a lot of what they do at the PGS is relevant to environmental scientists. You guys have got to stop thinking that these tight lines are constraining you. And we have the American Association of Geographers. I mean, if you talk to your faculty, you'll find out that every one of them maintains memberships in a variety of different societies. I see Dr. Hartman with us, and I know that she's a proud member and a respected member of the American Geophysical Union. All right, the list goes on. So climb the rings, right? Incidentally, I think that it's worth if we take a minute once in a while to tell people what not to do. Because in this COVID online circumstance for the second semester in my life, I've been spending a lot of time this weekend, and today I'm formalizing my prosecution of over a dozen students who have given me the highest quality data set I've ever had of cheating, because they're in a chat group during a synchronous exam, and the chat group is time stamping correspondences, and they're asking each other for questions and providing each other questions and thanking one another for providing each other questions. So just avoid the temptation and steer clear of this. I know that no one's in the room with you when you're sitting there with your laptop, but it's not like the world isn't keeping a record of it. So just don't do it. All right. So that is, I think, a little bit of the introduction regarding scholarship. And now I want to do a different screen share, and we're going to the Gulf Coast. And I do want to say immediately at this juncture that this is occurring in the summer of 2010, and Dr. Schiappa and Dr. Snow and I led a GGE field trip to the Gulf Coast. This was, I believe, before we had the field investigations course. So this was really just a field trip. There's no credit hours involved in this thing. And I want to invite my colleagues to chime in and add comments through the chat room or open up the mic, what have you. It's really a celebration of all of us and what we did in the past, and to whet our appetite for what we want to do in the future. So I love it when this thing showed up in my feed, right? It also occurs to me during this COVID time, I have an idea, and I really think that as a faculty in our department, we need to talk about it. But there's a whole bunch of things. There's a lot of content, and much of it falls outside of our designated classes and between our designated classes and as an umbrella over our curricular design of classes. And there's just this huge body of knowledge that you guys, the students, really would benefit from hearing and knowing, but it might just fall through the cracks. You know, for example, yesterday in glacial geology, I got into this, diatribe about aquifers and aquatards and source rocks and reservoir rocks of hydrocarbons, and how the whole environmental world changes when you introduce clay into some kind of material. Clay changes the game in so many regards. And drilling is another example. You know who would benefit by knowing more about drilling? Every single one of us. Now, it is true that some need to know more about it than others, but if you're geography and environmental studies, you should still understand something about drilling. It has something to do with the environment. So I'm just like, what's the backstory of gasoline? Who amongst us should know the backstory of gasoline? Every one of us should understand something about the geological occurrence of hydrocarbons and what refining means and what are the environmental impacts of petroleum production. So I'm just beginning to realize more and more that there's just a whole bunch of content knowledge that everyone in our department would benefit if we put a little repository on our webpage somewhere. And, you could just read through it like you read through your Twitter feed. Just someday, just sit there and read about these cool stories. Drilling is an important one. I think I made that point to you in an email I sent last week. So here we go. And one of the things that has happened while I've been at SRU was that this huge idea of hydrofracking for natural gas was discovered, and it became sufficiently described that Wall Street started to bet big money on it, and that was a game changer in Pennsylvania. And today, of course, we have this huge cracking plant being built down in Beaver. And Dr. Snow could tell you how many tons of methane and ethane that plant is going to emit to the atmosphere. Well, amongst the topics that you should understand about what it takes to create the circumstance that you can go to the gas station anytime you want, virtually in your entire life, and fill your tank up, and there's still more gas to be sold, is that, you know, I love Lake Erie. I grew up on the shoreline of Lake Erie. And if you live up in Erie on a clear night, you can look out over the blackness of the lake. And yes, you can see the illuminated sky of Toronto and Hamilton, Ontario, and other Canadian cities. But the lake itself is dark. Amongst the costs of petroleum production, all those people who live on the Gulf of Mexico do not get that. They don't get a dark sea. There are 3,000 drilling and production rigs in the Gulf of Mexico, and everywhere we went along that shoreline at night, the Gulf of Mexico was like a Christmas tree with bundles of colors of lights out there. And to me, that is absolutely a cost of petroleum production. You don't get a dark night. And of course, we, the United States of America, you and I, us, are currently in the process of allowing these rigs to move up the East Coast of the United States so that no more on Hilton Head Island or Long Beach Island or Atlantic City or the Outer Banks, it may come to pass that we don't get to look out on a dark Atlantic Ocean either, because we could have 3,000, 5,000 drilling rigs off the Atlantic seaboard. We're doing that in the United States of America, you and I. We should be cognizant of the cost of doing that. So this picture with the multiple rigs prompts me to say that. This slide here, it could not have been written when we went on this field trip, because this is in hindsight. But I couldn't help but, you know, once I told you guys you should watch Deepwater Horizon, you know, guilt comes in. And I think, well, I better Wikipedia the Deepwater Horizon. I better, you know, make sure that I'm at least as competent as I told the students to be. So here's a little bit about what was going on. The rig exploded on 10 April, and it was 19 September when they proclaimed that the leak had been shut off. It was almost a mile deep in the water column. If a diver was down there, they would have been squeezed by the compressive confining pressure to have their body be about the size of one of those little plastic G.I. Joe shoulders, which is obviously lethal. People couldn't go down there to fix it. And at the moment of the blowout, the cutting bit was at 18,360 feet below sea level. A blowout preventer failed and a concrete plug failed. And there are backstories on those, and they are gripping stories. To date, it was labeled as the largest marine spill, 4.9 million barrels of fuel, which is 210 million US gallons, or 780,000 cubic meters. So you guys might want to learn, you know, different ways to write powers of 10, right? Since a lot of the software programs, including D2L, don't allow you to put a superscript in. We put in the E there for exponent. That's commonly the way these numbers are put into computer programs, okay? So we got to continue to learn more familiarity with different ways to represent data. In response, all kinds of things were tried. They put booms around slicks and they started lighting the oil on fire to burn it out of the ocean. They were pumping and recovering the mixed oil and water out of the booms. They were using all kinds of dispersants that had diesel fuel in them and other compounds, of which it was really controversial. No one knew, is the dispersed oil worse than the crude oil? What are the ecological impacts? How is life going to be affected? Then they even took to scrubbing beaches and marshes. There was huge marine lethality. Like 70,000 turtles was the estimated name. And you guys know that sea turtles are having a hard time. And, you know, Finding Nemo, right? Dude, fin, noggin, all right? Like there's important consequences. Watch Finding Nemo and see the beauty of the color and the life on those reefs. And then you ask yourself, do you care if we lose all of that? Do you care? And if you do care, what are you going to do about it? These are the kinds of questions that I pose my students in my classes on a daily basis. The ultimate finds were just astounding. $19 billion in fines. BP paid the largest share. Transocean owned the Deepwater Horizon rig. Halliburton put the concrete plug into the borehole. And Anadarko was a minority shareholder in the rig. $19 billion in fines, over $65 billion in compensatory damages and punitive damages. BP ultimately had 11 counts of manslaughter for the 11 people that died on the rig that day. And if you haven't watched Deepwater Horizon, I mean, I really, like, you know, like I tell you once, twice, thrice, you ought to watch it. And let me just tell you one more time. You ought to watch Deepwater Horizon. Because until you do, you're probably only going to know a fraction of the backstory of what it takes to have Sheets always have gasoline anytime you pull up. They got 4 misdemeanors and they got felony lying to Congress. So this is what we can understand about the spill 10 years later in the rearview mirror. But in the summer of 2010, actually, Dr. Livingston, Dr. Schiappa and I were collaborating in a grant, and Tamara and I were out in the field mapping 1 or 2 days a week as we're listening to the news, and we see people. Guess what? Not everybody in America could agree on how bad it was. Imagine that. Not everybody could agree. We had Alpha and Omega. We had people saying, this is nothing. And we had other people saying, this is environmental Armageddon. So we asked the dean, and Tamara got some money, and we took a field trip in August. And we drove a long ways. So, and from here to the end, this is a slideshow that the students from our department, geography and geology, environmental science, environmental studies, all these different students got together. They made this beautiful little slideshow. There's the route that we took. And we went down to one of the first places where the Army Corps of Engineers cut its teeth on learning how to evict people out of a valley when we're going to build a dam and their house is going to be flooded. So this is happening in Tennessee in a place called Land Between the Lakes. So this is like, you know, Dr. Smith all the time is talking about the history of conservation in the United States of America. And he, you know, he just has this tremendous command of knowledge in the history of the Park Service and the history of environmental regulations. And we are kind of, in a very real sense, on hallowed ground here, because the United States of America is learning the process of some huge environmental initiatives, like how to build a dam and take people's farms and close cities and flood them and move everybody away. Like that's, you know, environmental equity, all right, huge issues at play here. And like I made the point when speaking about Darwin, you know, if you go on field trips with us, if you're awake at night, we're going to lay out in a field and I'm going to teach you stars and constellations. We've had so many really avid birders in our department who can teach you to call of birds. Any birder will tell you that when they go out to do a bird count, they only see 1/5 of all the birds they count. 4/5 of the birds they identify by song. And we'll help you learn some bird songs. And you're going to see that we're going to learn weather and meteorology and oceanography and culture. It's all presented together. And really a prize-winning field notebook is building lists of all these different things. You know, a great geology field trip has students come home with a list of new species that they saw that they had never seen before. Yeah, okay, that's biology. Listen, we want you to learn everything, including United States history. So we're going down the road and I see Shiloh, Tennessee, National Battlefield. And I'm like, bring, hello, Tam, we have enough time? Can we stop here? This was the bloodiest battle in the American Civil War, and I don't want to drive past the battlefield, so we stop. And we see American bison. Who knew? And then while we were sitting here having a lecture in the morning, because we camped right next to the Pickaway Dam, this eardrum shattering horn goes off 3 times. Not once, but and they have to put out that warning to fishermen and boaters because they're about to change the valve settings on the dam and the river is about to rise or fall. And this thing, of course, is a major hydroelectric property. So there's just so much going on, so much going on. When we get out from this, underneath this COVID-19, I want you to know that the students and the faculty, and the students, we are all mutually eager to get back on the landscape and engage in field studies. Holy smokes, we went past Tupelo, Mississippi, the birthplace of Elvis. So there's a whole bunch of smiling young ladies, and they are on the porch swing that Elvis used to swing on. How cool is that? One of the things that happened here, we had a student on our course named David Higginbotham on the field trip. It wasn't a course. And his uncle was a really successful chicken farmer down in Mississippi. And he called ahead and he's like, my uncle said we can stay with him. And we didn't even have to camp out because he had this big party center on this lake and he let us in there. And then they fed us a beautiful dinner with hush puppies, you know, like showing us the Southern fare. And over here on this, this beautiful dock that he had, I'm chatting with the old man, the uncle, and we hear this splash, splash, splash. And I look over and I see these students running down this gangplank and then vaulting off of the rail and doing acrobatics, 2.5s and twists and spins and somersaults and splashing into the lake. And I'm finding out, hey, we got students in with our trip who are incredible gymnasts because they grew up doing vaulting. And then the old man says to me, whoa, 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 I never seen that before. And I'm like, what's up? He's like, swimming in this lake. I'm like, well, don't you swim in this lake? No, I don't swim in that lake. I'm like, why don't you swim in a lake? He says, because that lake's full of cottonmouths. So I found out that day something that I know for sure. Slippery Rock students are not afraid of cottonmouth snakes. Who knew? And then, of course, you know, I mean, I'm about to test my students on the story to Atchafalaya in John McPhee's The Control of Nature. That's happening this weekend, right? The levees of the Mississippi River are now twice the length of the Great Wall of China. Why? Because there's one on the west bank and one on the east bank. So the levees of the Mississippi River are now twice the length of the Great Wall of China. Twice the height of the Eiffel Tower is going to be one of the multiple choice questions, but it's not the right answer. Twice the length of the Great Wall of China is the right answer. And holy smokes, we see the opportunity to drive on the levees. So there we are driving on the levee of the Mississippi River, teaching students about what levees and how to spell them, all right? It's not a Levi. And all of a sudden, Tamara and I and Julie, we're talking about timing and routes and alternatives. We're looking at the atlas. The students just take off. They like the damn professors are taking too long talking. Look in the floodplain. There's a trail down in the floodplain and they just declare a spur field trip. And they walk down in the floodplain. They come back a little while later. One of them holds up her hand. I'm like, holy smokes. She found a tooth. An alligator tooth. I'm like, I never seen an alligator tooth before except in pictures, but that's an alligator tooth. And so, yeah, we were like pretty stoked. I'm like, look at this, man. Look at these students. They're going into the swamp without us telling them to. It was awesome. As if they just passionately wanted to see what was there. And so, you know, when we did this first slideshow, I think we did it in the ski lodge, actually. We used to have departmental weenie roasts in the ski lodge. I would love to see them after COVID-19 is gone. My wife is there and she's watching the slideshow and she's like, Patrick, you didn't drive in the floodwaters, did you? People die when they drive in the water, right? You know that, Patrick? And I'm like, well, you know what's crazy is the Mississippi Delta is lowland and it was pouring and every road was underwater everywhere. So if you didn't want to drive through standing water, you just had to stop driving, but that wasn't in the itinerary. Getting to New Orleans was in the itinerary. So here we are with our vehicles looking like motorboats, but everybody's doing it and it's everywhere and you can't go anywhere without doing it. So yeah, I'm sorry, babe, but we're driving through standing water. It's what we had to do. And then we got down to Old River Control, all right? So I've been teaching about this place for decades of my life and had never seen it. Oh yeah, we're finding out about fire ants, all right? So students are...
Oh, I just remembered those.
Oh yeah. Like students are sitting down in the grass taking notes and drawing pictures in beautiful field notebooks, and all of a sudden they're like, ow, ooh, ow, and they're standing up and they're jumping around. And they are learning about fire ants, which kids who grow up in the South know about, but kids who grow up in the North don't know about. So, there's another little unexpected lesson. So here we are at Old River Control, and believe me, I'm doing freaking cartwheels. All right. John McPhee stood on Old River Control, and Dr. Burkhart and Dr. Snow, Dr. Schiappa stood on Old River Control. And in the flood of 1973, the whole structure was shaking like a bowl full of jelly. Yow. And then we got down to New Orleans. All right, hand grenades and hurricanes, and the students having some fun, all right? But the faculty having fun too. So I remember the lecture that night at dinner. By the way, we spent as much renting entire youth hostel for one night in the French Quarter as we spent camping the entire rest of 2 weeks. But Dr. Schiappa called ahead and she lined up all kinds of cool things. And I'm lecturing the students, don't you bring the man down. Don't you get in trouble. You come home safely. You don't walk around by yourself. You have 2 buddies and you go around in 3 packs and you stay together. You wait outside the bathroom for one another. Don't you bring the man down on me. Because it's got to be kind of a crazy night. And then, of course, Dave Higginbotham and I, we were the last ones back into the youth hostel. We barely found the place, 4:30 in the morning. Who knew? Who knew? It's New Orleans, the Big Easy, man, the Big Easy. I mean, while we were there, by the way, we saw the houses with this railroad, like insignia spray painted on them, a circle with quadrants, the X and quadrants. And the high water line of how high the water from Hurricane Katrina was. And in the quadrants was the number of the military unit that searched the property, the date of the search, the number of dead corpses recovered, and the number of injured transported for help. So 5 years later, we're still seeing wrecked houses with high water lines with the railroad sprayed onto them. So I'm telling you, like, we're learning a lot. We're learning a lot. And we got down to Venice, Louisiana, which is, if you please, for the 6th time, won't you please watch Deepwater Horizon so you understand a little bit more about the largest oil spill in history? Because when you see them flying in a helicopter out to the drill pads, we saw the heliport. We stopped and took pictures of the heliport. And, the ecology is unbelievable. So, you go watch, Forrest Gump, Bubba's Shrimp Company, Shrimp Creole, barbecued shrimp, Cajun shrimp. It just goes on and on. The seafood industry, all the fishermen, all the different types of products. Oh yeah, we found some oil. This was the first oil that we found, and it was kind of gross. And usually when I'm on a field trip and I find something gross, I ask the students if they'll be kind enough to clean up this disgusting mess. But what are we supposed to do with a bucket full of oil? Put it in a van? No, we just leave that one there. Breaks my heart, but what am I going to do about it? So there we are. We're at the end of the road. We're at the end of the road. It's the end of the road. You want to go further in the Gulf from here, you got to get on a helicopter or a boat. And then we just kind of leapfrogged our way along the coast, going from park to park to park to park, which was really totally cool. And everywhere we go, we're asking people to share their story. We interviewed sheriffs, cops, park managers, FEMA personnel. Dauphin Island, we have spent more money trying to protect every trophy house on that barrier island than we have spent on any other square feet in the United States of America. They just keep coming back and saying, you have to protect us from erosion. You have to protect us from erosion. Please protect us. Please protect us. Spend federal money, spend federal money, spend federal money. And we went to a number of different scientific groups along the way and heard what they had to say, capture their story, hear their concerns. And so far, we have not been able to find any oil. All right. I mean, we found that bucket of oil, but we haven't found oil in the Gulf. And we're capturing lots of opinions on what's going on down there. And we're seeing all kinds of cool things on a day in, day out basis. We're camping every night. We're learning about thunderstorms. Woo! And we're taking boat rides. But we still haven't found the oil. And we're learning about estuaries and birds and fishes and alligators and people. But we still haven't found the oil. And we keep learning and seeing, but we still haven't found the oil in the oceans, but we still haven't found the oil. And this woman, Ann from FEMA, she met us one day and she said, you know, yes, the BP oil spill is horrific, but we weren't even up off of our knees yet from getting slammed by Hurricane Katrina in 2005. But she says, but you know what's worse than Hurricane Katrina and worse than the BP oil spill, and you're not hearing anything about it, is the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico from people in Slippery Rock applying fertilizer to their lawns, and farmers and sewage treatment plants, and half of the United States of America sending us their nutrient runoffs from their landscape. The dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico, the eutrophic oxygen depleted waters that kill everything that they drift over, is a worse disaster than Hurricane Katrina, and a worse disaster than the BP oil spill. So tell me that that's not an epiphany to hear that from a woman. And it just goes on. Estuaries, refugees, marine labs, pitcher plants. One of the 3 places in my life that I've seen pitcher plants in the wild. You want to know what's really good for salt marshes? Stay out of them and leave them alone. A little bit of weather down there.
There's Ellie.
Let me go back. Yeah, Ellie Schiappa, that's Dr. Schiappa's beautiful daughter. She's doing great things. And finally, when we got to Pensacola, Florida, guess what? We finally found the oil. But we didn't find that oil till we got to turquoise waters, because when we were near the mud of the Mississippi, we couldn't see the oil for all the mud in the water. But then we found the water, we found the oil.
I remember swimming with it.
Yes. So as we swam, students were coming out with filamentous strands of oil in their hair. And there were patches on the seafloor where you could see oil covering the sand, and then they were coming out with tar on their heels. And then in the stratigraphy of the dunes, we could see the layers of sand and oil. And we found the oil. And at the end of the day, we told all the students, go into the showers and scrub that crude oil off of your feet and out of your hair and off of your skin. It's rich with PAHs, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, some of which we know are carcinogens. And we thought back, who at the beach that day doesn't get to go to the shower and wash the oil off? And the answer was, of course, the sharks and the turtles and all of the fish that were there. They don't get to take a shower at the end of the day to watch the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons off of them. But our students got to. So that little sign about oil, I think I still have a copy of that in my office. I bet my colleagues have a copy of that sign in our office. Okay, there's the lamination of the oil in the sand. And all kinds of fun stuff on the way back too. Lots of bloopers. There's Dr. B acting like he just took a dump in Elvis's outhouse, but I couldn't. All right. There was plexiglass there, but I faked it a little bit. All right. Listen, my friends, we all know that the United States is a mess right now. We all know that COVID-19 is a pain in the butt, and we're all getting ripped off for it. But it is the science underminers in our society who have made this entire circumstance worse than it needs to be. So you guys don't get to be released from understanding the germ theory of disease. And you guys don't get to be released from understanding that respiratory droplets are spreading the plague. Let's embrace science, understand what we have learned, and get out from underneath this nasty cloud so that we can get back to having wonderful field experiences with each other. In the meantime, good luck with your final exams. I hope you have wonderful holidays. And thank you for spending 50 minutes with us. I myself and any of my colleagues that are willing to hang out for a few minutes and answer any questions, we're happy to chat with you guys. It's been a really delightful semester of GGE seminars. I'm so thankful that they're being taped and archived so that you could go back and watch them again or share them or see them for the first time. Happy holidays, everybody. Be safe.
Thank you, Patrick.
Thanks,
My
Patrick.
pleasure.
That was
Heike.
great.
Thanks, Tam.
Tam.
Looking forward to your
Thank you, Julie.
tonight.
Oh, yeah. Tam, do you remember how hot it was in the tent? Do you
Oh my
remember?
God, it was so hot. Remember we got
That's what I remember.
Didn't you have this battery mini ventilator thing?
we bought fans and I can't remember.
Yes, yes.
But at the end, it was like towards the end of the trip too.
Yeah.
You know?
It was, and then it was when Ellie was with us, and we were like, we couldn't take it anymore, so we went out looking for fans in these stores.
Probably
Oh my
couldn't
God,
find
it was
one.
so funny.
Oh my God, it was awful. Yeah, that was the part I remember. But I also remember an alligator on a hike. We hiked somewhere, and then there was just this humongous alligator just sitting
Yeah.
there.
And I don't remember where we were.
I don't know. I don't know where we were. I don't remember that, but I do remember that alligator.
Yeah. Yeah, that was fun. That was a great
Yeah.
trip.
Yeah.
That was a really